Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Teixeira. I'm the director of building of Business Competence Center of Effisus. I have the pleasure today to host this wonderful session with these distinguished guests about a very key topic for our market and for our sector. With me, I have Sheldon. Sheldon is an architectural engineer. He is currently working as a senior facade engineer for AKT2. Welcome, Sheldon. Sheldon has worked in a variety of projects, both nationally and internationally, with different challenges in the facade industry. I have as well with me Shuib Lekmeti. Shuib, welcome. Bill Shuib is the external wall director for CHPK Group. Shuib has a vast career in the UK and internationally, and he has been designing and delivered many high-level iconic buildings worldwide with different levels of complexity, such as the Selfridges building in Birmingham and the World Trade Center in Abu Dhabi. I have as well Kevin Yin. Kevin, welcome. Kevin is as a facade technical director of EOC. Kevin has been, with his over 20 years experience, has been instrumental in pushing the boundaries for facade design. He has been leading some of the most technical advanced projects in the envelope facades worldwide. And we have Leandro Heine. Leandro is a building envelope consultant and associate director at Thornton Tomasetti. With Leandro, work is all about cladding, right, Leandro? So Leandro's work goes from the concepts, design, specifications, testing, fabrication, and installations. He particularly works into investigations, forensics, and this area of recladding. And finally, we have Abdullah Quadri. Abdullah, an architect and currently the specifications manager for Effisus here in the UK. And he has an extensive international experience as well, which specializes in developing and implementing innovative solutions and looking towards the... Are you hearing as well? Yeah. And looking towards efficiency and performance of our buildings. So the idea today is to have a conversation about a buzzword that we hear and we talk a lot, and is very key for us in our sector, that is recladding. And particularly recladding has become a key issue for us after this incident that we had with Grenfell and its consequent actions that were taken from that. Maybe I start then with you, Shuib. How has this incident affected the work in the facades, particularly with recladding?
Yes, definitely. After the Grenfell Tower fire that everybody remembers, tragic one, but we've seen literally a huge amount of changes in the UK's framework regulating fire safety in the buildings. Starting right from the top, the primary laws, to regulations, to statutory, non-statutory guidance. If I were to pick something that were more like impacting the recladding, I would say that we started with the government issuing those advice notes, between 2017 to 2020. Initially, it focused mainly on addressing the ACM cladding similar to the one installed on Grenfell, and for buildings above 18 meters. Then it later extended to include all type of combustible material within the buildings, all heights, regardless of the height. Then if next one probably is the 2018 introduction of update of Regulation 7. To be honest, it was actually more like an introduction, because nobody used to hear much about Regulation 7. So 2017, the government updated that regulation and used a vehicle to ban the material, combustible materials in the installed and building above 18 meters, and set the minimum fire reaction requirement to A2. The everybody remembers better, A2 S1D0. So no material should be used except certain components can be found in cladding, such as seals, gasket, thermal breaks, and membranes. Though we have to remember that membranes actually are picked up on ADB. They have to be minimum BS3D0. So you have to part in that. Then it followed with a series of updates of ADB. And then 2021, we saw the introduction of the Fire Safety Act, which actually made a huge shake into the cladding industry. So what happened at that time when it was mandated? So the principal responsible person of the building has to carry out a what we call the fire risk assessment on external wall. So the fire risk assessment on external wall became integral part of the fire risk assessment of the entire building. So by law, you have to carry out. How this might impact the recladding? We all know the fire risk assessment of of external wall will lead to determine whether the risk is acceptable or not acceptable. It's not about compliance. But when it's not acceptable, the risk is high, then it has to remediate. Then that has created a wave of mostly the culprit behind the building being high risk is the inclusion of combustible insulation and the lack or defect within the cavity barriers. That will lead to get into those components within the car will lead to partial or actually full recladding of the building, because it depends on how the extent of the wall type that cover that. That creates a huge wave of work, and given the fact that Regulation 7 will not allow the minimum A2 S1D0 to be put on the building, then that creates strain on the availability of compliant materials and availability of specialist contractor as well as specialist consultants, because we see a lack of how to deal with volume of work. Then after that, we saw the introduction of the ADB 2022 that actually lowered the threshold of the application of Regulation 7. It was above 18 only. Now this dropped to 11. So now we have a large number of buildings that are affected. So instead of above 11, now above 11 meters have to go through the assessment, and it will mostly lead to remediation and recladding. Then we saw the introduction of the Building Safety Act, which introduces a new framework to regulate high risk with HRBs, high risk, and namely introduction of the BSR, so the Building Safety Regulator, introduction of the gateway systems, introduction of the enforce the golden thread of information, in addition to giving a new definition to the HRBs. Usually the criteria was above 18 meters. Now it's not only above 18 meters, the stories, the number of stories. If you have 7 stories, your building will fall under the HRB category, regardless whether it's above 18 or not above 18. Then what happened after that? We saw the introduction of the PAS 990 that everybody knows probably about. 990 is a standardized methodology, because up to 2022, we used to use the guidance notes that introduced by the government 2020, which used to be known as the CAN, so the consolidated notes. So everything is referred to as that. Now the PAS created or provided a standardized methodology by which to refer to for fire engineers, facade engineers, to determine whether the building is high risk. So it creates some of a common playground for people. What if I were to list how this is impacted on the recladding? I would say probably Regulation 7 is the most impactful one, because it's limited the number of material that can be installed. Followed by the lowering of the threshold height from 18 to 11, that massively extended the number of buildings, and therefore the amount of work that we have to cope with, either as a specialist contractor or specialist consultant. We see the lack of or very shortage of a number of particularly fire engineers, facade engineers, that key to successful remediation of this building. In addition to the BSR and the gateways, so the HRB has to follow a certain procedure. Now we understand the review time is up to 12 weeks, and 12 weeks is from the time they actually acknowledge the application. So people now becoming very concerned about submitting the application. So a lot of work is being done before you submit actually to BSR, so to avoid these delays. So it creates a huge amount of delays. Obviously, delays means cost, and this has strained more on the because of the longer time you spend on the remediation, the costly it becomes. However, I have to say it's not all doomed and gloom. But we actually these challenges have created a ground for innovation, and then since 2017 we saw a number of either improved or a new product that came actually to on the market, namely for example, membranes, ACM cladding, that's A1, chips A1, as well as some of the cavity barrier that you can actually install it with a little or no disturbance to the outer layer. So this that's some positive of that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rip. And maybe, Leandro, from your perspective, when assessing a building envelope for recladding, what are the main issues that you're currently identifying?
Yeah. Hi. So yeah, following up from Shoaib, I think Regulation 7 has a major impact not only on recladding work, but on our day-to-day facade engineering work. Luckily for that, we have the SFE and CWC guidance, which helps navigate the complexities of membranes, non-membrane materials, etc. But I would say that when we start to assess a project for recladding, there is a number of key issues that are quite recurring. I've got a few down here. If we take aside the fact that we have to remediate due to fire regulations or concerns about fire, I had a figure this morning. There's about 6,000 buildings yet to be remediated. Taking aside the sort of the forced remediation with regards to fire materials, I would say that it's typically related to end-of-life systems. So facades which are 25 or more years have reached end of life. There's a series of things that we find common. It may be failure of seals, leaks. We find failure of glass. There may be condensation or mold. Typically, tenants or asset owners are clearly concerned about deterioration of finishes, facades that are not aged well. And this is a very typical concern for buildings which are maybe only 30 or 40 years old and originally were designed with the best intentions but have clearly reached end of life. So that's a key assumption. So common issues which revolve around 25 or 30-year-old buildings are sometimes very practical. There is a lack of reliable as-built documentation. So it's very important where us professionals come in for surveys, either intrusive or non-intrusive surveys. There's a lack of a reliable maintenance log. We don't know how often windows are being cleaned or why they have not been cleaned. It's also one of the most practical issues about recladding, particularly where the existing deteriorated facade has to be removed, is the suitability of the existing structure. So that's where we have to work collaboratively with structural engineers and other surveyors. Other aspects which are quite common in terms of assessing building envelopes are understanding the limitations of the performance. Which parts are we going to remediate? Do we accept a lesser standard of thermal performance? Typically, fire is a non-negotiable aspect of performance. We have to upgrade to current fire standards. So there's conflicts between standards of performance. There's tensions between fire, but we don't have to forget, weather tightness, air tightness, and other types of performance. And then some other common themes which happen today in our projects are obviously sustainability. We've heard a lot about whole life carbon versus embodied carbon, operational carbon today at the conference. Circularity associated to sustainability. So what happens with all these materials that can potentially have to be removed? Are they recycled appropriately? We've heard from colleagues today from Saint-Gobain about the new scheme for recuperating end-of-life glass and sending it back into the supply chain. And finally, challenges which not only happen on remediation projects, but also on all types of projects, which are procurement challenges in terms of warranties and scope splits, which I'm sure my colleagues will explain further. But when you remediate a facade and you decide to retain certain aspects of the structure or existing brickwork or something, there is sometimes conflict of interest between what other warranties that the new supply chain coming in will have to deal with versus what is remaining on the building. So
Exactly.
that more or less summarizes our current views.
Perfect. So clear challenges that we have there. And maybe Kevin, from your sides, from an engineering point of view, when you're tackling such projects, what are you been facing with?
Well, I think, thank you, Leandro summarized a lot of these challenges in this recladding or refurbishing, whatever the purpose is. I think I would like to probably look at it from the point of view of project delivery. I think the biggest challenge, in my view, is the clarity of the responsibility. I think for the new build project, the responsibility of designers, contractors, subcontractors is well established in all sorts of different form of contract terms. When it comes to the refurbish or reclad, it's not that clear. Things get quite muddled up. It's a result of a mixing of retaining part of the material which has been installed years ago, and like Leandro said, sometimes you don't have much information about it, and also it's a result of different level of innovation renovation we want to put into the building, how much we want to do, how much we want to retain. So the lack of responsibility also drives into, well, normally the responsibility always comes with a risk. So the lack of the clarity, it comes into the two end results. Either people don't know the risk and walk into a situation, they expose themselves into a risk they didn't know. The worst case scenario is a catastrophic failure at the end, or people, because they don't know risk, they becomes very protective and very risk aversive. The result is we are missing, in that situation, people would miss a lot of innovative opportunities. So if we have a, so it's very critical to define the responsibility clearly at the very beginning. The second challenge is probably is the clarity of the brief, the priority of the project. For example, if the project has a aspiration or the priority to maximize to be sustainable and maximize the reuse or recycling of the material, probably the architect, the client would have to compromise in the aesthetics. For example, accepting some scratched glass, accepting scratched framing, as long as they are structurally sound, they are still providing the performance. Yeah, and the third one is the lack of knowledge. Although I believe a lot of us have been working in the industry for many years, decades, but when we come to the variety of the problem we're facing, we still feel there's a big lack of the knowledge. Yeah.
Perfect. I think, in fact, we have here over 100 years of experience, and we're still learning every
Yeah,
every day,
exactly.
clearly, right? And maybe there, Sheldon, when looking then into with all this complexity and integrating then this new envelope onto an existing structure, how do we tackle that?
Yeah, so from a facade engineering perspective, we spend a lot of our time focusing on the interfaces between two systems. So a lot of the joints. Now, as Kevin's just said there, the responsibility in these areas tends to be quite muddled and a bit ambiguous, especially depending on how things are procured. So yeah, that can be an issue. So if we take it back a step just from the interface perspective, and we go back to something that Leandro touched on, which is the actual inspections and understanding what we have in our facade at the beginning point and what we can work with, and understanding if the components have performed as we expect them to perform. So, I mean, we know that there's changes to the regulations, as Trib was saying, the fire regulations are changing. things were built in a certain way that may no longer be sufficient, and you may have to enhance some of that facade performance. So, I mean, we just recently completed a job where, after inspections, we realised that part of the retained facade, that they wanted to retain part of the curtain walling, and they realised that the fire stops had basically, they weren't fit for purpose anymore. So these all had to be extracted and reinstalled. Now, a little point on this replacing old materials with new materials is something that we need to think about in terms of performance. Like, Leandro, you briefly mentioned it, but there is a balance here where if we're looking to take something like XPS or this polystyrene, these combustible insulations out of walls and replacing them with mineral wool, we know that the performance is not as good. So although we've now created a building which is more fire safe, we have relaxed the thermal performance, and therefore it's going to have more of an energy demand. So this is just another point that I think we should all be aware of. Now, assuming that all of this is fine, we'd always say to focus on the interfaces between the two systems, the existing and the new. What we're looking to do is try and achieve robust weather-tight details, both from inside and outside. We're trying to prevent water from propagating in, but also it's really important to prevent the moisture from entering into the facade from inside. I think sometimes that can be overlooked, and ultimately they'll both cause degradation of the facade over time. It's during these stages of design that we'd always say early contractor and supplier engagement is always recommended. They have vast knowledge and experience in delivery, and this knowledge can be a really valuable asset during the detailing phase. It's also really good in enhancing the transition through the early REBA stages into the later stages, when contractors then begin to bring their proposals on board. They don't have to completely redesign parts of the facade. Personally, we've had some really good experiences working with yourselves and your technical teams in being able to give us assistance in understanding both the limitations and best applications of the products, because I think we should all understand that the suppliers, they will know the limitations better than we do, and they have a greater knowledge of their product. So it's important that we really do use the knowledge that's available in the market for us. Another point that links back into this interface in design is the facade movements, where we're looking to reclad and take off whole pieces of structure, or whole pieces of facade, and replacing with whole new systems. We need to understand that we're now going to be loading that structure in a completely different way to maybe how it was done before. And this structure is going to respond differently to that. And this response needs to be accounted for in the interface design. It's quite common that, if this isn't properly considered, you may have joints that excessively compress or excessively open up, and you're creating more problems. You're creating opportunities for water to ingress into the systems. That they would be the two main points. And I think for a final point would be ease of installation. I think sometimes it's overlooked that both the ease of installation and sequencing that we have when we're looking at this recladding designs. We need to ensure that as designers, we're really trying to simplify the systems as much as possible and reduce the complexity for the people who are actually working and delivering this on site. The less complex details, the more likely we are to achieve a better integrated system.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And maybe Abdullah, just to finish from a manufacturer point of view, how you have seen that the industry has developed with regards to these fire safe solutions. How has that development been?
I think what my colleagues were here saying was actually very point on. And as we can see outside, even we have seen several products that are going par apart on fire ratings. Some of them products are even A1 and better. Here, the point was before the Grenfell, we had several red flag projects where we saw a lot of true awakening that we should have seen, we should have been aware of, that this is going to come apart. One such example was the Lunken House in 2009, where it went through the remedial process. Over a 10 million budget was spent over for exactly this thing, because we were running after thermal efficiency and energy efficiency, but we neglected the fire aspect. Later on, the tragedy happened, and we saw, oh, here we needed to wake up. But we didn't wake up, and Grenfell happened. And at that time, we are still now chasing the new trend of fire and fire and fire. But the products were there at that time, and products are there at now. So innovations have been happening. We have been working on a lot of different aspects. We were considering movements. We were considering high-rise building, fire protection aspects. But at that time, we were running behind energy aspect. Now we are running behind fire aspect. So what is getting neglected is either one of them. So moisture control, energy efficiency is on regular basis. If we are living in any building that requires this, is on regular basis. We need to protect our building both from moisture and make it thermal efficiency at the same time. We need to work on air tightness. Fire is an insurance policy. God forbid it doesn't happen every day, but when it happens, we and our end users are protected and safe. So industry have been working a lot on this, but I think the lack of, as Kevin was saying, the lack of awareness, the lack of collaboration is a big part playing here. Many of the industry players have been just running behind checklist after checklist. Am I okay with the building code? Is the energy efficiency required enough? Just now I was speaking to one of the colleagues, and they did a recladding project where I was asking about how is the thermal efficiency after the recladding. They said it might be even worse because now the checklist was fire. Can I do good on fire? And it is, but now we have neglected thermal performance on it. So at this point, I think we can have better products, we can have better collaborations, but the idea is we cannot neglect one aspect or the other. We must work on them simultaneously, and that's how we can achieve better buildings. And that's how we can be successful as an industry and not have these kind of tragedies again and again.
And you mentioned an important point, that is the collaboration for us to handle all of that. So it's not the consultant, it's not the architect, it's not the facade contractor. So it's the collaboration, as we have heard throughout the day today, and that needs to take a role here. And the question then to you is, how could we tackle that? So how could we approach that need for collaboration in such projects? I don't know if one of you wants to take that first. Maybe Yolandro.
I mean, it's all very nice saying, yeah, we need to collaborate, we need to collaborate. It's a given that there's a client who appoints a competent team and we all know what we're doing. The problem is the conditions for this collaboration have to happen in terms of time and resource. Uh, we're all squeezed for fees and programs become shorter, but a smart client will recognize that the fact to be able to collaborate is not only sitting in the same teams meeting week after week, but giving the conditions for that collaboration to happen. And that unfortunately needs a bit of time and trustworthiness. We are finding ourselves having to educate clients and other colleagues about what are the things we need to tackle first, and how that collaboration can happen in a weekly or monthly program. So the conditions for collaboration have to be understood by all parties. That's one thing.
Shrib?
If I want to add to what Leandro is saying is, yes, collaboration is a key. I think what we like collaboratively say that if we focus only on one thing, then we might lose the other, as everybody is saying here. And the focus, because the focus is on fire, we might end up a compliant with a compliant building but not performing. So the key here to collaborate, as Leandro was saying, is having, of Kevin said earlier, the priorities, and those priorities needs to defined by the client. The client is the key, because there's certain elements of, especially in the recladding bit, that will have to the client will probably have to step in, and some of the responsibilities needs to be taken. Because if you have to retain, I'll give you examples, because when we know what's happening in the UK at the moment, a lot of recladding are due to fire safety, and then to remove something that is not safe and then put it back, then is that element is been there for 12, 15 years. So theoretically, still can run for another 10 years in theory. But the moment you take it out, you want to put it out, who's going to take that responsibility for it? Who's going to give you the warranty? And that gap needs to be filled up somehow. And the key is probably here is the client to have to take a little bit of initiative here.
I think we ran out of time. I'm sure I was aware that this is a topic that we can go for the rest of the day with, and I think with the interest of everybody. But I thank you very much for the participation and for the inputs. I think at the end this is a matter of really us looking into our role in the facade industry, in the facade envelope design execution holistically. We cannot look at it independently on checklist basis. We really have to look at it together with all the aspects of the building, all the aspects of the project, together collaborating into having the best possible holistic solution that is executable for this project. So thank you very much for your time. It has been a pleasure. And I'm sure we'll continue these conversations afterwards with everybody that is interested in this topic. And I think it's going to be a long conversation still for the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.